Thanks everybody in the Asia Pacific region for joining us tonight, or today for you. We just recently launched Google Web Designer in November with a lot of new exciting features, and I have myself and 3 engineers from my team that want to go through and demo some of these new features for you. Today we'll be showing you a new sprite sheet component, a new DoubleClick and AdWords Dynamic authoring workflow, and also a Street View component, new templates, and a lot of new improvements to our animation engine. So I'm going to start off and I'm going to demo the sprite sheet component. One of the engineers in the room, Nicola, actually did all the work on this, but I love demoing this so much. It's so much fun to demo, so I'm going to go ahead and demo it, and he'll do some other demos here in a minute. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so again, the first feature we're going to demo is the sprite sheet component. We've heard from a lot of customers that they do use sprite sheets, and prior to now there wasn't really a great way to work with sprite sheets in GWD. So let me just go ahead and demo a basic workflow of how you would use this component. So I'm going to take a basic background image here, put that in, I'll go ahead and center it, and then I made a group that is really just this JPEG that I duplicated a bunch of times to create this little piece of ground. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this out. And let me drag that over here. And I'll align that. So I'm going to just do a really basic animation. Start at frame 50. Create a keyframe. And then I'll move it just like that. Okay, and then I want that to actually loop an infinite number of times. So let's just do a quick preview and see what we have so far. So just the ground running by, basically, is all we have so far. All right, so the next thing I need to do is bring in a couple of components. So the sprite sheet component, obviously, it utilizes sprite sheets. So I have a sprite sheet in my library called foxy.png. Just want to kind of point that out before I start the rest of this process. So I'm going to drag out 2 components. First will be the sprite sheet. And I'm going to position that so that it's kind of just a little bit overlapping the ground there. And then I'm also going to need a tap area component so that I can make it interactive. So there's my 2 components. So the first thing I want to do is configure the sprite sheet component. So I'll select the sprite sheet component, and then I'll go to Properties. So when you use sprite sheets, each cell in the sprite sheet is a certain height and width. I already went into another program and I measured the height and width. And down the road it'd be great to auto detect this, but for this first iteration you do need to go in and manually detect the height and width of each of your animation cells. So I know that the animation cells here are 153 width and 139 height. I'm going to set the height and width of the component to those dimensions. Then I also need to set the source. So again, I showed you the sprite sheet was in the library, and it's called foxy.png. And the width of the cell is the same as what I just set for the component, 153 width and 139 height. I also, for the alignment, just want to align to the bottom. And I don't want to do any scaling for this particular project. So you see on here we have advanced settings. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to set up some advanced settings. So I know that this animation is actually 12 frames long. I want the duration to be 50 milliseconds, and I want it to loop an infinite number of times, and I definitely want the animation to autoplay when it starts. So I'm going to hit OK. Let's do another quick preview to see what we have so far. So now we have the fox. He's running along. Looks pretty cool. But no interactivity so far. So let's work on that. So really all I need to do is just add 2 events to make this an interactive experience. So I'm going to go down to the Events panel, and I'll create my first event. So the first event is going to be on the tap area. When I touch or click the tap area, I want to define a new animation in the sprite sheet. And so I know that in that sprite sheet on the second row down is a different animation of the fox jumping. So I'm going to offset 278. And don't let these numbers scare you again. This is all stuff I just measured outside of GWD, which is normal with sprite sheets. But you'll know these numbers when you measure them on your own sprite sheet. So the width is still 153, the height is still 139, and this animation I know is 18 frames long. And the duration, 50 milliseconds, and we just want it to jump once. And infinite. And then autoplay. So let's see what we have here. Okay, actually, let me do one more event real quick. So the second event will be on the sprite sheet for when the animation ends. And we're going to define a new animation in the sprite sheet. And so what we're really doing here on this one is going back to the beginning of the sprite sheet. So there's no offset. Again, 153, 139, and the frames are 12, and the duration is 50. And we just want it to play one time and autoplay. All right, so I'm going to move over the tap area over this. Let me just make that a little bit better hit area. Now let's see what we have. The fox is running along. I can click on him. He jumps, and he keeps jumping. So we don't want him to jump forever. So we'll go back down here. And I'm going to just change this event here and just say, or maybe it's the other event, actually. That's once. Yeah, that was 1. Sorry about that. And this one should actually be 0. Did that backwards. All right, let's try that again. So I click, he jumps one time, then he keeps running. So that's the sprite sheet component, a really simple example. There's all kinds of powerful things that you can do with it. So for our next demo, I want to turn it over to Nicola, who's going to talk to you about the Street View component and a couple other things that we've done in the tool. There you go.
Hi everyone, I'm Nicola. I'm a software engineer in the Google Web Designer team, and today I'm going to talk about 3 new features that we'll be introducing in the newest version of GWD. I'm going to start with the Street View component, and as you can see, I just put together a master creative in GWD. It's basically composed of 4 different pages. The first one is the invitation stage, in which we have 3 different tab areas, and each of them leads to a different page. I'm just going to quickly preview the creatives to give a sense of how it looks like. If you click any of these 3 buttons, we start the Street View component. As you can see, you can move around and have the same Street View experience that you can have today on Google Maps. By clicking next, you move to the other location, and so on. So the way we've been doing this in Google Web Designer is basically by, as you can see in any of the 3 pages, dragging and drop the Street View component that's now available in the component panel. And if you select the component and go on the properties panel, you can see all the different settings that's possible to set for customize the component itself. I'm just going to quickly show you what the advanced settings are. As you can see, we have 3 different options: heading, pitch, and zoom, that allows us to move the camera around. I'm just going to give a quick example of what I mean. So if we move on Buckingham Palace as it is, the opening is looking this direction. If, for instance, we want to change the angle, we just need to select the component, go on Show Advanced Settings, and moving the heading. For instance, if we do 270 degrees, we are rotating the camera clockwise in that direction. And if I preview again, as you can see now, the camera is pointing to a different direction. By changing the pitch parameter, you can actually tilt the camera looking down or upwards, and with the zoom parameter, you can actually zoom in or zoom out. I'm going to now show the new templates that's been introduced with this release of GWD, we have now more than 180 different templates. In this release, we've been focusing on brand formats like VPaid for YouTube and additional masthead formats as well. One of the templates that we'll be introducing in this release is also Lightbox, so engagement ads for the Google Display Network. I'm just going to quickly show you one of them. So the way we've been building these templates actually allows us to create just one creative for all the different platforms. So you have here the desktop page that allows us to create the creative for the desktop as well as the tablet and mobile. We do take care of resizing as well as changing the creative based on the orientation of the device, so you don't need to take care of that. And these fully support the Google Display Network. Last feature that I wanted to quickly showcase is the new code editor. If you remember the previous version, we had a white background. Now we have a more an improved color scheme that allows actually to have a longer experience without actually get the eyes tired. The color scheme that we've been using also allows us to have a better font rendering as well. So as you can see, the font looks sharper. And if you want, you can actually switch from the lighter version of the themes to the darker version of the theme. We also improved the search functionalities. It's now possible to search and iterate through different occurrences of the same word. That's all from me, and I'm going to hand over to Lucas that's going to talk about the animation model.
So my name is Lucas, and I'm an engineer on Web Designer, and I'm going to talk about some improvements we've made to our animation system. And first I'll talk about animating position. If you're setting position as part of a layout, it's typical to use left and top styles, but if you're animating position, it's almost always better to use translation. And this is for a couple of reasons. First of all, translation performs better, especially on mobile devices. If you animate left and top, you might get 10 or 15 FPS, whereas if you animate translation, you can reliably get real-time performance. A second reason is that left and top styles are rounded to the nearest integer at render time, which can lead to jagged or stair-step-like artifacts. For example, if you have an element that gradually slides into a position, towards the end of it, when it's slowing down, you'll see it discretely chunk from pixel to pixel instead of moving smoothly. This problem is not faced with translation because it respects subpixel positions. So in light of this, we've changed the default behavior of Web Designer selection tool to make it easier to animate using translation. So here I have an asset on the stage, and if I move it around, it's the same behavior as before. I'm setting left and top styles. But if I add a keyframe, so I'm now animating the element, then when I move it with the selection tool, I instead set translation. And you can see that translation's been set in the PI. I could have done this previously, but I would have had to first select the translation tool, whereas now you don't have to remember to do that. You can just always stay in the selection tool. So here's that animation. And if I go to code view, and to make the text easier to read, I'll just zoom in a bit. So here in code view, we can see that the style rule has just left and top set, whereas the keyframes rule has translation set. So that's the default behavior, to use left and top for layouts and translation for animation. If you don't want that default behavior, you can explicitly choose a setting in the tool shelf. You can always set left top or always set translation. And there are cases where you want to use these, and I'll show you a quick example. Let's say that I have a simple animation of this car bouncing up and down. So here we go. Great. Now previously, if I wanted to shift the whole animation to the right, what I would have done is go to the first keyframe and move the car, go to the second keyframe and move the car, and so on. And it's a very tedious process, but we no longer have to do that. Instead, what we can do is change the mode to use left and top, and then move just the first keyframe. So I do that, and I play the animation, and now we see the whole thing has moved. The reason this works is because translation is applied on top of left and top. So by setting just the left and top layout, the translation gets carried along for the ride. So the improvements we've made to animating position have also been done to animating the sizes of elements. First of all, we now support scale. So in the property inspector, There's now a new row for scaling in each direction. Here's scaling in X, it's scaling in Y. If you want to scale the same in all directions, there's a lock button on the left. When that's set, setting one channel sets all the channels. In analogy to setting position, if you use the resize tool to set the static size of an element, that just sets width and height as before. But if you animate size, then we instead set scale. And again, this is for the same reasons, that it performs better and avoids these jagged and jittery artifacts. So here's that animation that I just created. And once again, if I go to code view, I see that I have a style rule that has left top width and height set, and a keyframes rule that only uses translation and scale. Finally, we've made an improvement to working with rotation. So I'm going to have this element move from one side to the other, and I'm also going to have it now rotate twice. Previously, to do this, I would have had to add several keyframes because we could only have keyframes that were at most 180 degrees apart, but that restriction is now removed. You can have arbitrary settings. So I set one keyframe that goes at 720, and I'll slow this down so we can see the animation. And now if I play it, we see that the car does indeed rotate twice. So that's all I wanted to show you. I will now turn things over to Kishore, who will talk about dynamic.
Thanks, Lucas. Yeah, hi, my name is Kishore Subramanian, and I will be talking today about a feature that we have introduced recently with the latest version of GWD, which is to author dynamic creatives in GWD. So dynamic creatives are creatives where you have some or all of the data coming in through a data feed. So think of creatives where, for instance, a list of products is shown at runtime and it's selected at runtime, depending on various signals that we know about the user, right? So how does this happen? So let's start with where is this dynamic information defined, and then we'll come back to GWD to see how that can be used. So to do that, so let me first go into Studio. Now, Studio has this object called profiles, which some of you are probably familiar with. Profiles are encompass the data, the dynamic information, and the rules associated with that data on how to select the data for a creative. So let's take a look at one example which I will use during the demo today. Here's a profile called Demo Dynamic. This is the dynamic feed is provided as part of the spreadsheet. So let me take a look at the spreadsheet and show you what kind of information is present here. So as you can see here, there are different columns in the spreadsheet: title, description, there's a CTA for call to action, and a different information about products. And there are many such products in this case. So in this example, I have 4 products, but that could be literally hundreds of products, and we will, at runtime, certain number of products are selected. So this is how the dynamic information is added to Studio, DoubleClick Studio, and the current workflow requires you to copy paste the HTML5 generated code, as we call it, H5 generated code, and paste it in your creative, and then requires a whole bunch of JavaScript coding to actually make the data binding between the dynamic data and your elements or the HTML elements in your page. So, which is very cumbersome, and obviously not. It requires a certain level of JavaScript coding skill set to actually get that going. Now, let's see how we have improved that in GWD. So let me switch over to GWD at this time. Okay, so in GWD, we've introduced this notion of dynamic, which was already part of an earlier version of GWD for AdWords, but in this release we've supported it for Studio as well. So with this release, we support dynamic creatives for both AdWords and Studio. So let's start by looking at a creative here, where in the interest of time, I've done a few things to the creative already, but nothing in the dynamic section. So let's preview the static creative and see how we can add dynamic content to it. Now here's here's a 300 by 600 creative where I have an image, a placeholder image. I have placeholder text for various information that I want to see, right? And I want to replace this with images of products and information about products and multiple products in this case from all the where the data comes in from the dynamic feed. Okay, so let's go back to GWD. Now, here is a swipe gallery, just to give you an idea of what this creative contains. And then it has a gallery navigation component, which allows you to swipe through the different frames in the gallery. Now, the gallery itself is one of the components that we support, right, as part of the list of components. So I'll not go into that. But the gallery is configured to use a group called gallery frame. Now, let me take a quick look at what the gallery frame looks like. So I'll pull in the asset library and click on edit for the gallery frame. Now the gallery frame, as you can see, has this image, has different layers for the information about products. Now these are all placeholder text, and I'm going to replace those with dynamic information. Now let's see how that is done. Now so in the dynamic tab for this group, I'm going to click on plus, which is going to let me pick, actually in this case, it's going to ask me to pick an account. So this is the advertiser and the account. So I'm going to pick an account that I'm going to use for this demo, the advertiser. And as I mentioned earlier in the Studio UI, we saw the profile called Demo Dynamic, which is what I'm going to pick right now. Now, as soon as I do that, it navigates me to this bindings tab. Now, what is data binding? So this is the place where we bind an elements property or elements attribute. So, for instance, an image source attribute to some a key path within the dynamic data. So, in other words, we are binding the source attribute to some column within the dynamic feed, right? So let's do that. And let's start with the model or the image, and then I pick the source attribute of this image, right? So image has different attributes. I'm going to pick the source. I'm going to bind that to, as you can see here, you see the different columns from the feed, and which you can correlate with the profile spreadsheet that you saw. So these are essentially the columns in that spreadsheet. So I'm going to pick the image URL, right? And similarly, I'm going to bind a few more. So for instance, the title has a property called text content, which I'm going to bind to the title field. I'll do a couple more, and then we can switch to, we can preview it to make sure that we have everything. Again, text content. Description and CTA is what we want to do. So here's description, and just one more. CTA. CTA is a text, and again, we'll pick the text content. So you could do different things, including background color or font and things like that, depending on what you have, what kind of information you have in your dynamic feed. So CTA. Now with this, let me click on OK, and this adds the different bindings here. Now let's see what happens here. Let's quickly preview what we have. As you can see here, the static image has been replaced with the image of the model in this particular case. And you have title, description, all the placeholder text being replaced with values from the default, the feed or the spreadsheet that we had. Now, but again, as you can see, there's only one product here, and we want to see a list of products or different frames with different products here. So let's see how we can do that. In other words, we need to bind the dynamic information has a set of rows, and if you think of a spreadsheet with number of rows, we want to bind each row to different frames in the gallery. So let's see how that can be done. So I go back to my gallery, and there is yet another binding where I'm saying that my gallery frame, which is a template for each frame in the swipe gallery, must be repeated, right? So I'm going to repeat the gallery frame for each item in my collection and the collection is this particular spreadsheet, right? So spreadsheet has a number of rows, and for each row, I want to repeat the gallery frame. That's essentially what it does. So, and similarly, I can bind the rest of the information. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to quickly preview a creative that had already done the bindings in. So here's an example where you have the different products show up in different frames of the gallery, and each of them has information such as title, description, the price, and other bullet points related to that particular product pulled in from the feed at runtime. So this is something that we are very excited about, and hope you find this useful as well. With this, I'll pass it on to Sean, and we can take Q&A at this point.
Thanks, Kishore. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And we're available for any questions that any of you might have. While I'm waiting for those to come in, I want to mention that we do have a lot of YouTube videos for a lot of those features that go even more in depth on how to use some of them. I believe a lot of them are actually localized into different languages as well. So I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A. So what I'm going to do is, since all you guys were nice enough to join, I wanted to give you kind of a sneak peek of things that we're thinking about doing in the coming months, some new features that we're going to be working on. So I'll start with things that I know we're working on right now. One of those is a very in-depth workflow around using media rules in a visual way to author responsive content. And that's a big effort that we have going on right now, and we'll be shipping in the spring. Another thing that we're doing is we're revamping our entire user interface, both from an architectural perspective and also from a styling perspective. So you're going to see a lot of improvements like tab panels, and in general, the entire app looking a lot more modern. Let me think what else. We have a lot of things cooking right now. We're also going to continue to, we didn't mention it today, but in the last release, there's a lot of improvements around how you author text. And there will be more improvements in the spring where we continue to give you better font handling and more power with your text authoring. A little bit longer term things that we're looking at that probably won't come out in the early spring are things like masking. So people have asked recently, like, well, when are you going to remove the beta label from GWD? And one of the big things that we really feel like we need to have is masking. So basically being able to, in a visual way, have a mask key and a mask layer. And when you look at all the Flash ads that happened over the years, probably 90% of them use masking in some form. So it's really important functionality. And we are going to be putting that into GWD sometime in 2016. I have the engineers working on the feature looking at me like, don't say too soon. But sometime during this year, we will have it in. So again, I don't see any questions yet. We're happy to take any questions about the features or GWD in general, if you have any. Trying to think what else I could let you guys know that we're working on. Am I missing any of the big things that oh, well, I am missing a big thing. So another thing that we're doing is a full developer revamp. So the code editor is going to get a lot more work done to it. So there'll be a lot more capabilities with the code editor. There'll also be a lot more improvements around components. So we want to make it possible so that you can bring just about any Polymer custom element into GWD eventually, but we're going to very soon ship with a nice set of 15 new components or so, a large amount, UI widgets like drop-down boxes, radial buttons. And so once you have these sort of smaller widgets in the tool, it'll be really nice if you can actually see those on stage. So we're going to do some work to make sure that that's possible, so that when you're doing advanced layouts, let's say of an ad that had there was a quiz or something that required all these UI elements, that you can actually see them on stage. We'll also be putting in a web server for preview, so that all of the different components preview in a fully functional way and just give a better experience. So we have multiple folks looking at that, and that's going to be going on throughout the spring. In terms of like a release date for most of these features, not including masking, we're looking again sometime after Game of Thrones launches. I'm not sure anybody watches that show, but probably like maybe let's say late April, early May, somewhere in that time frame. Okay, so I do see one question. General question: are these recorded and shared anywhere for future reference? I don't know the answer to that. I think we do record these on occasion. We have one person helping us. I'm not sure if she can type in if she knows if we're recording this or not. I'm not sure. But thank you for the question, Ian. There is one we did for another region earlier in the week that was recorded. I'm not sure where that's posted though. Any other questions that we can answer for you? There we go. Oh no. Currently answering. Yep, that one's done. We answered that one. Okay, planning on making some of the engineers on our team, myself, we're going to be making some trips out to Asia. We're hoping to visit customers in some of the major countries there. So we're definitely looking for GWD users that would, we could come in, maybe show them some early features. So if you have contacts, let people know that you're interested. We'd be happy to think about coming to visit. Can you please record this and publish to YouTube? That would be great. I'm not sure. Can you confirm if we're recording this? Well, if it's being recorded, we'll absolutely post it. If not, I apologize. Okay, so not many questions. I think I'm just about a material, honestly. I gave you a pretty good roadmap. We got the demos of all the new features out. There'll be lots more to come. We try to ship every 3 or 4 months, so we keep new functionality coming out. If you have questions or bugs, always please feel free to come to our forum. And ask your questions. We're always there to help. A lot of the engineers on the team actively review that, and we use that information a lot of times to make feature decisions and decisions on what bugs we fix. And by the way, I think in this latest release we fixed around 50 or so bugs in this most recent release. So unless there's any more questions, I suppose we'll go ahead and call it. But I do appreciate everybody coming and taking time to listen to the new features, and thanks so much for using GWD and oh, great overview. You're welcome. And we'll try to do this more often. Like whenever we launch, we'd like to get some FaceTime with you guys so that we can just show the new features, and that way you can actually sort of hear from the engineers who actually created them what those features are all about. So with that, I guess I'll sign off. And thank you so much for your time, everybody. Have a good morning or night wherever you are. Cheers.